Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. Very interesting pregame, and I know we say that all the time, but I feel obligated to say it when it's true, which happens to be almost every time, Jim. So um, it's usually driven, as it was today, by some personal events. Sometimes it's family stuff, sometimes it's friends. Sometimes it's, dinners we've gone to or events we've been to, and kind of a little bit of all of that. And we started talking about it and connecting it to our framework and our flywheel. The self hyphen word that we came back to after a long conversation was self talk, which involves the self conscious and how we talk to ourselves, which is a topic entirely unto itself. But the kind of the peripheral areas we were talking about the differences between um, our relationships with different types of people. And the biggest divide there at the initial point of contact is the difference between men and women. And we were talking about how that has kind of been in a societal way. We've kind of tried to meld those two things together as if they were the same. And I feel adamant about this, Jim, that they're not. Men and women are very, very different. And the other thing that struck me, and I'll let you kind of frame it up as you do so well, is I have, and you do too, four generations of examples. I have, I had relationships with both of my grandmothers. I knew them pretty well. I was very close to my own mother, right? I have an ex-wife, right, who also had a mom. I had a girlfriend, right? And I have two daughters. So we got 100 years. So whatever was true in the 1910 or 20s, and whatever's true in the 2026s, we have a pretty good sample of the consistency that exists between the differences between men and women. And one of the things that seems to be happening today because of what we talked about, society, social media, AI, COVID, all of these things have been dramatically confusing people with regard to who's who and what's what. So there's so many directions that we can go here, Jim, but self-talk is this idea that whatever I was given or passed down generationally through my grandmothers and my mother, I have a choice at some point in my life, hopefully early on, whatever's driving my subconscious, this self-talk that we refer to, that at least was partially given to me by my mom and by my dad. Do I am I comfortable with that, or do I want to do some work on that because I don't have, for instance, in the five areas of life, I'm not thinking about money the way I'd like to, or my relationships aren't where I'd like them to be, or perhaps my health isn't where I want it to be. Whatever it is, the first step is self-awareness, right? I have some level of control over this. Do I choose to exercise it? So I'll throw it back to you, Jim. It's a big topic.
Yeah, like in Mark, like we do every week, the pregame always sets us up. But in preparation for a topic this morning, I came across as I always do, I refer to our framework of these five areas of our life, and in no particular order, but of course our profession, our relationship with money, our relationship with the world, our worldview, our relationship with ourselves, our physical, mental health, and something that we when we created the framework, I think it was actually one of the first categories we came up with, and that was our relationship with others. And there's the subcategory is male, female, male being our fathers, brothers, uncles, friends, very different relationship than female, our mothers, sisters, aunts, daughters, and so on and so on. So this is a video I actually came across over the weekend, and it resonated in a lot of ways because um, it turns out that the relationship with our mother happens even before we've come into the world. It goes from 0 to around 5 years old. Our brains get programmed, and that is really the DNA from our mother. So what's going on in their mind, and that's how our subconscious gets developed. So I'm fascinated in the neuroscience as much as I am the result of that. But a lot of what as humans is a social construct that's been developed over time of the role of a man and the role of a woman. So again, I'm not trying to we're not trying to debate what's wrong or what's right, but these are social constructs that in our lifetime, particularly since the 60s, with the women's movement, which has obviously produced some really good results of equality and other reasons, is also, you could say, thrown things off a little bit too, because the roles are been blurred as far as what our different roles are, for good or for bad. So again, I'm not trying to.
Yeah, as you know, I'm writing a book, and that topic is part of the book because
Mhm.
I help men now that are struggling to rebuild after divorce, and a lot of those men are confused about who they
Mhm.
are. And you part of what happens when you get divorced, because I am divorced, is you lose your identity for a while, and you probably are your self-worth gets taxed, your confidence gets taxed. And so the rebuilding process is fascinating, but part of it is, what happened, why did this happen, what could you do about it, and what do we want to do moving forward, which is all self-awareness. It's all self-reflection and self-awareness. And then you and I we're connected at the hip from this self-talk topic, as we got together because of the power of the subconscious mind, and something you were struggling with 5 or 6 years ago that we've worked together on for a long time. And you also give me a lot of credit for being self-aware. And I don't know that I give myself the same level of credit, but I'll take your word for it.
Mhm.
So,
Well,
and to close on that, I think that's why, at least since I've been around, that there's been talk about singing to your baby in the womb or talking to your baby in the womb. So this influence over the child at a very kind of the age of conception, almost through young adulthood, it's a real thing. And our mothers are very influential on us until we determine that we want to shift that influence if we choose to.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, again, the whole framework starts with ourself, and the center of those 5 areas of our life is our self hyphen, and self awareness is number one. So this is definitely related to self awareness. But this talk about the subconscious mind. I mean, it's 90%, 80, 90% of all our thoughts come from our subconscious mind. Our behaviors, everything we are, comes from our subconscious. So that's that, just being self-aware that that's being played out. And then that was developed early on in our childhood. So again, I'm looking more about the neuroscience as anything else. But it was a quote that I've used over the years, and it very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. And that is, the most important conversation you'll ever have is the conversation with yourself. Um, and the this has a whole new meaning after the information that we're going to talk about today. Is that the subconscious mind is like the engine of your mind. It never turns off. It's constantly processing information in your subconscious. So the most important conversation you ever have is conversation with yourself. Is Couldn't be more true. It turns out, just the mechanics of the way the human mind works. I also will play around with it and say you're also having a conversation with a crazy person, because you're talking to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and that in order to change that thought, you have to change the channel, change the environment. What I didn't realize is that conversation often is directly related to that conversation that you're having with your mother. We're subconsciously um, trying to please her or not let her down. That's just part of the way the human mind gets wired in the age 0 to 5. So yeah, I think that what we're going to talk about is the importance of relationship with our mother. And this is definitely we're not blaming women, but I have much more of an appreciation for for who they are, and because they also inherited that from their mothers, and their mothers inherited from their mothers. To your point about generational things, this is not to try to blame a woman for this way. Part of this is just who we are. And if you don't stop and think about it and interrupt that, then you're going to be in the subconscious mind being driven for all the wrong reasons. The conclusion is, and we'll get more into this in these talking points, that you have to get to the point where you forgive your mother for some things, and not hold her responsible for your own being. It's called growing up. It's called being a man. And yes, the social construct that, with good intentions, I think I've seen this. I've experienced this firsthand. Women by nature never want to let go of their children, particularly their sons. And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, particularly with technology, I call the cell phone the umbilical cord. That really never gets cut. And the difference is, when we were growing up, we didn't have this cell phone attached to us. where mothers were accessible to us all the time. We had to make mistakes and we had to figure things out. And I've seen how confused and how difficult it is for young men, well, for all people, young girls too, not to have to make these decisions because their moms are always there, either to help them, give them money, give them support, advice, sometimes not even good advice, emotional opinions. So it's yeah. Again, I don't. I really want to focus on the neuroscience about how this has evolved with technology, and then the result of that we see every day. So I've cut and pasted a few things from this video that I shared, and I think it speaks to this because now at least we can be familiar with what's going on in our mind, our subconscious mind, our thoughts, and how it is directly connected to the relationship with our mother early on in life.
Yeah, I think so many thoughts. I mean, I think that the second topic here, the second subtopic, I should say, is called self-parenting, and it's really the idea that you could become your own internal mother
Mhm.
to take over the reins, if you will, or to
Mhm.
modify your behavior. But going back to the differences between men and women, I say that with all love and respect for men and women. And different never means bad or good. It just means different.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so this
yeah.
isn't a
It's not a
question of
judgment.
no,
It's
it's
just,
not a well, that's what we make it though, right? That's what
of course,
we
it's
make
what
the
we do.
mistake. And I like to think because I did some research on this for my book, that conversation in the 60s, I don't think it was as much a conversation as it was a rebellion. And
No question.
it was a
That time
fight.
period.
It was a fight from the
And
very
many things, not
beginning.
just the women's movement, right? There's
Yeah.
many rebellion
Well,
against the government, a rebellion against wars, all kinds of things were being challenged. Yeah.
and I think part of what happened when you start by fighting, there's immediate disagreement, there's immediate accusation, there's immediate dissonance, right? And it's like, then did we really ever have the conversation? Did a significant number of intelligent, competent, capable women sit down with a significant number of intelligent, competent, capable men and say,
Mhm.
let's hash this out? Never happened, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that
Mark. I
conversation
just I
still.
want to add to what you're saying. 'Cause it's kind of really super important because I don't miss this thought. But again, this is why I like to have these conversations. One, it's self-awareness, but it also connects the timeline of what was going on in the world. To your point, many things also with the technology. Because remember, at that point, television was becoming mainstream. So
Mhm.
there's two technologies going on at that time where this information gets amplified and pushed out in ways that was never thinkable that
Mhm.
affected um, the way people view things. So I really appreciate what you're saying. It was a time period where a lot was changing. It was also a technology called TV
Mhm.
that everybody, not everybody, the majority of the population, American population, was viewing and was experiencing somewhat of the same thing. That was not, they had radio before, but it was just different, right? News medias and things. So it's an important point. But let's, if you could, let's kick off with the first. And I've, in the spirit of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast, the imperfection is the perfection. Um, I like to do the self hyphens. It turns out that there's a whole library of this in human psychology. It's been recorded, but the subconscious, and I've somewhat renamed that as the self talk. But why don't we start off with the definition of that, and then we can go down these other ones.
Okay.
If you could, yeah.
Yeah. Self talk, by definition, the subconscious mind is your brain's powerful behind the scenes processing engine. It operates below your active awareness to run essential bodily functions, store long term memories, automate habits like driving or walking, and process emotional responses, saving your conscious mind from being overwhelmed. It's funny. I don't think you can give too much attention to the power of this concept because
Mm-hmm.
and you said 90. I believe the figure's closer to 95. So almost everything we do, say, and think, we are not conscious of it. It is
Yeah, I
happening.
didn't. I learned that from you years
It
ago. I
yeah.
didn't. Yeah, if you Google it, it'll come up. It'll say 90. Some say up to 95%. Somewhere around there. But that's range.
The vast
It's
majority.
Yeah. I didn't know. I would have never known that unless you said it a few years ago,
Hmm.
and it was probably what's inspired this this topic this morning. But okay, yeah. So I think that's just a good kind of uh, foundation to have the conversation from. This is
Well,
going on.
this is the self-awareness layer, right?
It is.
I have
Yeah,
a say in this matter,
that's
right?
right.
But I need to choose to have a say in this matter, right?
Right.
And I would guess, based on my life and my work and just my age, the number of years of watching this is that most people, to your point, aren't even aware of this.
That's
And I
right.
sometimes
Amen.
we forget, I think, about we've been deeply digging into this subconscious topic for 5 years,
Yeah,
right?
we have.
And you've been doing extensive research, as have I. And let's not lose sight of the fact that when you know something well, sometimes we believe everyone else knows that well too. So I'm not
Hmm.
beating anybody over the head, but this might be evolutionary for some people listening. It might be I already knew that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
it's
Excellent
worth
point.
mentioning, I think,
Yeah. No, no
it's
question.
worth
That's why,
mentioning.
again, some of these, when I cut and paste, I'll do a search. What you're reading is something that I pulled through a search that has been documented. We're not just completely pulling out of our ass, right?
Right.
This is literature. This has been documented. A lot of it's in philosophy and other domains. But uh, turns out there's a word. Well, I'll let you read it next. This is such a thing called self-parenting. It's a
Well,
word that's
yeah.
used to describe.
Well,
Yeah.
the self-parenting, as this maintains, is the central solution is to stop waiting for external validation or rescue. One must take the role of their own internal mother, quote unquote, providing the compassion, boundary setting, and nourishment that was missing in childhood. If that were the case, this to me is a perfect example of you've got the self-awareness that this stuff's going on in your subconscious. What is it? Well, we don't know yet because we have to investigate what it is. We don't want to assume what it is. But did some of it come from my mom? Of course. Did some of it come from my dad? Of course.
Yeah.
Did some of it trickle down from my grandparents? Of course. So, but at
Yeah,
some
I see
point,
very, very different context. I see this as grow the fuck up. I
yeah,
see this as in, you know what, stop acting like a child and grow up and take responsibility for your thoughts. So
yeah,
it's
no,
like
you're not feeling any different than I am, dude. I
I just want
said,
to make sure,
yeah,
that these are very specific to self-awareness, but also, going beyond living your best life and letting go and being a man or being going from a boy to becoming a man. This is the stuff that is not easy, and by nature, or a woman will try to nurture and protect their offspring. That's very normal for a woman to do that with
hmm,
good intentions, nothing but
yep.
good intentions. So
Yeah, the challenge with this is that it feels like that's nice. What you just said is nice, but at some point it's not nice anymore. Now it's you're overdoing it. It's like you gotta, like birds, man, they push their kids out of the nest. It's time to fly.
yeah,
And if you don't, if you're not strong enough when you get pushed out of the nest, you crack your head open on the pavement. Life
yeah,
is not going to slow down. It's not going to get easier for you. So you got to figure out ways. And this is actually how we started the pregame, was how soft we've become and how
yes,
fortitude and masculinity and things like that have become like they're critical. They're those used to be admired qualities and admired traits. So this level of confusion about this topic is pretty prevalent.
hmm,
But you said something about this event you went to and how everybody was kind of cool. And I keep thinking about the Bill Maher statement, everyone's a monster until you meet them. I think some of this confusion, noise, and division on this topic are just propaganda, and some of it's actually going on. And I guess it's up to
yeah,
us to
yeah.
discern.
I'll expand on that. I was at a AI event last night in San Francisco. The beautiful facility. I've been in this building a couple other times, and it's right near um, the piers on the water. But it was I didn't know it. Well, I kind of knew it, but I didn't realize until I got there. It was a woman event, all AI women event. So for
Mm,
women invest or AI startup founders and investors and so on. And I've been to different events like this, but I was quite impressed. I was for a lot of reasons. One, there was a panel, and these weren't women just complaining about being a woman. A couple of them said something about being a minority, but one was an engineer. She had an engineering startup firm, and she was just saying, you know what, just go out there and be yourself. And was speaking mainly to other engineers that this what you've been told that men are bad or men are out to get you or men are trying to keep you down is not true. That's not been her experience.
Hmm.
And go out and be authentic, be yourself. Here's something else that I did receive from this panel that if it was a men's panel would be very different too. And I learned a lot more about how to women culture is important, taking care of their employees. They're much more thoughtful. So that's why they make some good managers and good
Hmm.
founders.
Hmm.
So it, yeah, again, it was a quality panel, but it was also some takeaways that if it was not an all woman panel, I think I know would have been very different because I've been to a number of them.
I
So
think it's the to my previous point that this difference between men and women is to be celebrated.
mhm.
It's not to be diminished. It's not to be denied or even ignored. I think that why wouldn't you want to take the best qualities of a person and try and prop them up and make them influential and get the best of them that you possibly could? And this nurturing skill, this thoughtfulness, this empathy,
Yep.
this listening skill ability, these are female traits.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean men don't have them. It means men have them in much lower rates, and it's
Hmm.
more unique for a man to have it. I get complimented all the time. I told you this because I raised two daughters on my own as their mother and father, that I'm more thoughtful than I would be otherwise and
Hmm.
more empathetic than I would. They're calling me feminine. And it's like, I don't take offense to it. I'm like, that's kind of cool. That
Yeah.
gives me a
Yeah.
kind of a unique advantage, I would imagine. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the conversation back to the 60s and 70s, it really hasn't ever taken place. It's just always been an argument. It's never been a conversation.
Hmm. Well,
But
I do think we're at a place, maybe a tipping point where it's not just, let's face it, there was a time when women were sexualized. It was all about, how they looked and what men could get from them. I'm only speaking for the where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't know about the rest of the world, the rest of the country, but yeah, there's that's not the leading thing. They have a lot more to add um, than just their bodies, and I think that's we finally have gone to that point where um, that's not interfering with their important contributions to business and other things. At the same time, I have a lot of empathy too because we're asking them to be and do a lot of different things. You're trying to run a company, you're trying to be a mom, you're trying to be a wife. Unfairly, they've been had to play all these different roles, and that's a social construct from part of the
that's the confusion. That's part of the
it is a
confusion.
confusion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
It makes
yeah.
me think about Jim is I remember my mother coming back from going to the mechanic to get her car fixed. This guy was a Greek guy who named
Mhm.
Deeb. He had
Yeah.
Marlboro Reds in his t-shirt and tattoos, and he was a rough guy. He was from
Mhm.
Greece, and he called her honey, and
Yeah, that's
that pissed her off.
oh yeah.
And she came home and she was complaining to my father. And I remember thinking to myself, if that bothered you, why didn't you say, Deeb, I need to ask something of you. I would appreciate it if you called me Pat and didn't call me honey.
Yeah.
And if Deeb doesn't respond to that, if he doesn't just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, Pat, that's just a term of endearment that I'm accustomed to using. And that's a conversation. And then it
Yeah.
goes away. And she did that herself. But to come home and complain to my dad, now he has to get out and talk to Deeb, right?
Mhm.
Or he's never going to hear the last of it, right? It's like
Yeah.
at some point, I don't care if you're a man or a woman, you can let something happen or you can do something about it. And it's that
Yeah.
I know it's not always that simple, but that's a
Yeah.
decent example of empower yourself, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Just that we had this conversation on last week's episode about victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
For women to really be their best selves, I think it's getting rid of this victimhood. I'd like to think that there's always going to be victimhood, and I mean, or I should say, bad actors or not very good people. But when you lead as being the victim, you're really giving your power to somebody else. And this
You
is
are.
doesn't not just to women. This is to everybody. And I think it does go back to our pregame about um, why young men are confused too, because so much of who they are has been influenced by their mothers more than ever before. They've always played an important role, but let's just come out and say it, right? I think the father has to play a strong role too about
Well, that's the
the
interesting.
kind versus being nice, and the nurturing versus the structure and being held
Well,
accountable. It's not serving our younger generations very well if if they don't develop that the independency of that.
yeah, I think there's two players in every circumstance. One is
Yeah.
the person to whom something is being done, and the other is the person who's watching that happen and doing nothing about it. And I think they're equally as responsible for whatever that outcome might be. But back to the self-talk topic, because we're coming up on it, I think is this is an empowering concept. This is like, I got 95% of what I do, think, and say, I'm not even aware of. So, what does that
Yeah.
mean? That means that you have the ability to exercise some level of control over some significant percentage of that 95%. So, to make you feel different about a thing, act different about a thing, worry less or more about a thing, right? One of my favorite phrases is 90% of the stuff I've worried about in my life never even happened, right?
Hmm.
So that's the subconscious. And all of these things, if we tack onto that the differences between men and women, then all of us, the men and the women, were walking the face of the earth under the control of a previous generation, mother or father, probably both. The question is that making us happy, or should we go inside and say, let's take a look and let's see what we can do about that? And that's why I love that statement that everything's a choice. Now, I know we all know it's not that simple. I mean, if your daughter is in physical danger from a man, you don't want her to figure that out on her own. You want to step in the middle of that and protect her, right? But generally speaking, if it's not if it's not a death threat, or it's not a sexual threat, or it's not a physical violence threat, there's a good chance that you can figure out a better way to respond to that or make a better choice. But I think
Yeah.
that's true of all of us.
Yeah. Let's read this last one before we wrap up. I This one also resonated in ways that I didn't expect.
Yeah, the self stagnation. That describes a state of being mentally, emotionally, or personally stuck where growth, learning, and forward momentum cease. It involves repeating the same habits and remaining in your comfort zone, even when those patterns cause unhappiness or prevent you from reaching your true potential. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like we all do that. I think to some extent, a question of degrees, but I think that speaks to the power of the subconscious mind. If we're
Yeah.
doing things in spite of the fact that it's causing us some level of discomfort or harm, obviously we're doing that subconsciously, because who would do such a thing consciously, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. But I think the takeaway or the conclusion is I didn't realize until doing this how much of the subconscious mind is connected to the relationship with our mothers.
mhm.
So again, just the mechanics of that alone. And then I'll wrap up with this quote that I saw or that I came across. It says it's about self-love and self-parenting, kind of the same things. Self-love is such a thing, right? You have to learn to love yourself. A
Mhm.
lot of that. I used to blame my mother for my childhood wounds, period. But only when I understood her pain did my own healing truly begin. The reason again, we have to give some compassion or some understanding. Uh, they were doing the best they could, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
they, they had inherited trauma and wounds just like we did. So often we hold our parents in general. Today we're just this is applies to our fathers as well. But I have a little more compassion, a little more understanding when you look at it with that lens, that they're doing the best they can with all the good intentions. But
Oh yeah, no, we talked about my mother as well, and I think, I remember I did two things with my mother. I recognized and tried to empathize with the cause of her insecurity. It was clear to me, and it was passed down from a generation before. It was
mhm,
a function of the relationship that her mother and father had with one another, and how she viewed men and how she viewed women, and it formed a victimhood about women and a toxicity about men that was stuck in her subconscious. And even though I did empathized with her and understood that, I didn't let her get away with any of it. It was just like I called her on it. Did I change her? No, but I wasn't going to say this is okay with me because I can attribute it to someone else. No, you're taking the chain and you're choosing not to break the chain. You could also say, I don't like this. I'm going to do something about it, but you've chosen not to. So I think you have to consider both of those things. Where's the source of this pain coming from? And how come you're not choosing to do something about it?